They say history is written by the victors, but what if the truth was buried with the fallen? Every secret leaves a trace, if you know where to look. This is The Broken Truth, decoding history, one broadcast at a time. The Broken Truth podcast, where history meets conspiracy. Every case tells a story, every story hides a lie.
They told you the flood was about sin. Well, they lied. It was about DNA. Look at the code. The human genome was hacked 5,000 years ago, and we're still cleaning up the virus. There is a history that fits in the textbooks. It is neat. It is linear. It tells you that civilization began in Sumer, that we evolved from the mud, and that the myths are just stories we told ourselves in the dark to explain the thunder. That is the history they want you to know. But there is another history, a history written in marrow and buried under seal, a history of a bloodline that was never meant to exist on this planet. Imagine standing in a field in the Ohio Valley in 1890. You are a farmer. You are clearing land, breaking the soil that has been undisturbed for centuries. You dig into a mound of earth that rises strangely from the flat prairie. You expect arrowheads, maybe some pottery shards. Instead, your shovel hits something hard. A hollow thud that echoes in your hands. You clear away the dirt, brushing off the roots in the clay. You pull out a jawbone, but it doesn't look right. You hold it up to your own face. It slips over your jaw like a helmet. You realize, with a cold sweat running down your back, that the mouth this bone belonged to could fit your entire head inside of it. You have found something that breaks the timeline. You have found something that shouldn't exist. They tell you the Great Flood was a moral cleansing, a punishment for bad behavior. But what if the water wasn't there to wash away sin? What if it was sent to wash away a specific genetic code? We are opening the file on the oldest conspiracy on Earth, the one that connects the pyramids, the Roswell crash, and the modern transhumanist agenda into a single, terrifying line. Welcome to the days of Noah. I'm your host, Garrett, and this is The Broken Truth. We investigate the narratives they use to control the world, and we break them apart to find what's real. We don't do safe topics here. We don't do the topics that get you a pat on the head from the algorithm or a sponsorship from the big networks. We go to the edge of the map. And tonight, we are going off the map entirely. We are tackling a subject that is arguably the grand unified theory of the paranormal and the biblical. It connects ancient archaeology, theology, genetic engineering, military cover-ups, and the modern UFO phenomenon. We're talking about Genesis 6, the Watchers, the Nephilim, and the Seed War. Now, before you roll your eyes and think this is a Sunday school lesson, stop. This is not a sermon. This is an investigation into a planetary intervention. This is an investigation into the possibility that the human genome was tampered by a non-human intelligence thousands of years ago, and that the evidence for this event has been systematically collected and destroyed by institutions like the Smithsonian and the Vatican. We are going to ask the hard questions tonight. Why do all ancient cultures, from the Sumerians to the Hopi to the Incas, tell the exact same story of sky gods coming down and breeding with women? Why do we find megalithic structures that we cannot replicate today with modern cranes? And why does the US military have classified protocols for dealing with anomalous biological entities in the Middle East? This is a dense episode. It's going to be long. It's going to be detailed. We are going to read the documents. We are going to look at the Hebrew. We are going to look at the bones. But before we descend into the archives, I need you to do one thing for me. Look at your app right now. If you're listening on Spotify, I need you to hit that follow button. Here's the reality. We are fighting an uphill battle against suppression. Shows like this, shows that question the official timeline, are flagged. They are downranked. The only way we beat the suppression is if you signal to the machine that you want this content. Hit follow. It takes seconds, but it is your vote for the truth. Tonight, we ask the question, are we alone? And more importantly, were we ever? Are we the apex predator on this planet, or are we just the livestock that survived the last call? Let's look at the official story. To understand the conspiracy, you first have to understand the cover-up. You have to understand the safe version of history that you were taught in 5th grade, and the safe theology you were taught in church. If you open a standard theological commentary or a history textbook, you're presented with a very specific, sanitized view of early human history. It is designed to be comfortable. It is designed to remove the supernatural element from our past. Let's break down two main pillars of the official story. First, let's look at the church. If you go to a standard seminary today, or you read the footnotes in the Schofield Study Bible, and you turn to Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, you will see a very strange event described. The text says, "The sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them, wives of all, which they chose." And then it says, "There were giants in the earth in those days, mighty men which were of old, men of renown." Now, if you read that plainly, it sounds like divine beings, the sons of God, mated with humans, the daughters of men, and created giants. But the mainstream church, they don't like that. It's too weird and too sci-fi. It implies that angels have DNA. It implies that biology is compatible between the spiritual and the physical. It opens a door they do not want to walk through. So around the 2nd or 3rd century AD, a theory was popularized, the Sethite view. Here is what the official story tells you this passage means. They say sons of God refers to the male descendants of Seth, Adam's third son, the good lineage. The church-going boys. They say daughters of men refers to the female descendants of Cain, the bad lineage, the party girls. So, the official story is that Genesis 6 is just a story about bad dating choices. It's a story about believers marrying non-believers. They tell you that the giants mentioned in the text weren't literal giants. They weren't 12-foot tall monsters. No. They say the word Nephilim just means bullies or tyrants. They were just regular-sized men who were really mean. They were moral giants, not physical ones. Think about that for a second. Does that make any sense to you? Since when does a religious man marrying a non-religious woman produce a child that is a giant? If a Baptist marries an atheist today, do they give birth to a 7-footer who eats people? Of course not. Biology doesn't care about your theology. Spiritual declension does not cause physical gigantism. But this is what is taught in 90% of seminaries. Why? Because it keeps the supernatural in a box. It suggests that the great tragedy of the pre-flood world was simply interfaith marriage. Good boys married bad girls, society got a little rowdy, and God decided to drown the whole planet. It sanitizes the horror, it removes the alien intervention, it makes the Bible safe for modern sensibilities. Now, shift over to the other side of the aisle, the Smithsonian and mainstream academia. What is their story regarding the massive megalithic structures found in Peru, Egypt, and Lebanon? What about the stories of the giants found in every single folklore tradition on Earth? Go to a museum, look at the timeline. They tell us, point A, we were hunter-gatherers, we hit rocks together. Point B, suddenly, in Sumer, modern Iraq, we invented writing, law, mathematics, astronomy, and wheel-based pottery all at once. Point C, we built the pyramids using copper chisels and hemp ropes. When you ask them about the anomalies, when you ask, hey, how did they cut that 1,000-ton block of granite in Baalbek with a copper chisel? They give you the official explanations. Explanation A is pareidolia. They say, oh, those reports of giant skulls, that was just people mistaking elephant skulls for human skulls. They say the hole for the elephant's trunk looked like a single eye, so the Greeks invented the Cyclops. It's a cute theory. It treats our ancestors like idiots who couldn't tell the difference between an animal and a human. Explanation B is acromegaly. They say, okay, maybe some large bones were found, but those were just genetic defects. They claim these were isolated causes of pituitary gigantism, like Andre the Giant or Robert Wadlow. But here's the problem with that. Pituitary gigantism makes you weak. It makes your bones brittle. You can barely walk. You die young. The legends of the ancients describe these giants as warriors, kings, destroyers, men who could run down horses and tear apart lions. That is not acromegaly. That is a different species. Finally, they use the ultimate weapon of the official story, the word myth. They say the Greeks had titans, the Norse had Jotun, the Native Americans had star people, the Sumerians had the Anunnaki. They tell you these are all invented stories. They say the human brain is wired to fear large predators, so every culture independently invented a story about big scary men to frighten children into behaving. They want you to believe that thousands of cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years all hallucinated the exact same specific details by coincidence. They want you to believe that the history of the world is purely human, that we have always been in charge, that we are the only intelligence here. That is the safe zone. That is what you are allowed to believe to get your PhD. This is what you're allowed to preach to keep your ordination. It requires no terrifying implications. It requires no non-human intelligence. It requires no conspiracy. But there's a problem. The evidence doesn't fit the official story. The text doesn't fit the official story. And the bones definitely do not fit the official story. So if we take a sledgehammer to this narrative, what do we find underneath? What happens when we stop reading the English translation and start reading the original Hebrew? What happens when we stop listening to the Smithsonian and start listening to the pioneers who actually dug up the mounds? We find the cracks, and once you see the cracks, the whole dam breaks. Let's crack the narrative. The Sethite view collapses the moment you actually read the text in the original Hebrew. You don't need a degree in theology to see it. You just need to look at the words. In the Old Testament, the specific phrase used in Genesis 6 is B'nai Ha-Elohim, sons of God. Now, we need to be very precise here because language matters. In the entirety of the Old Testament, every single time the phrase B'nai Ha-Elohim is used, it refers to one thing and one thing only, direct creations of God. It refers to angels. Look at Job chapter 1 verse 6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. That is a heavenly court scene. Those are angels. Look at Job chapter 38, verse 7, describing the moment of creation, when the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Humans weren't created yet. Those were angels. Adam is called a son of God because he was a direct creation. He wasn't born. He was made from dust. But you and I, we are sons of Adam. We are sons of men. To say that Genesis 6 refers to the lineage of Seth is a linguistic gymnastics routine invented centuries later to protect the reputation of the church. It doesn't fit the text. The text is telling us that beings who were direct creations, beings who did not belong to the human timeline, crossed the barrier. And look at the other side of the equation. The text says, they saw the daughters of men. In Hebrew, that is Benat Ha'adam, daughters of Adam. It doesn't say daughters of Cain. It doesn't say daughters of the wicked. It says daughters of Adam. That means women, all human women. The distinction isn't between the righteous and the wicked. The distinction is between the earthborn and the heavenborn. So we have a union between angelic beings and human women. And what is the result? This is where the biology argument destroys the official story. The offspring of this union were called Nephilim. The root word there is nephal. It means to fall. The fallen ones, or those who cause others to fall. But let's look at how the ancient world understood this story. 300 years before Jesus, 70 Jewish scholars translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. This is known as the Septuagint. When they came to the word Nephilim, they didn't translate it as tyrants. They didn't translate it as aristocrats or bullies. They translated it as gigantes, giants, earthborn. Why would they do that? These scholars knew the Hebrew language better than any modern professor at Yale or Harvard. They understood the oral tradition. They knew that the Nephilim were monsters. They were a hybrid species that grew to impossible sizes, consumed the resources of the earth, and eventually turned on humanity itself. If this was just a marriage between a Methodist and a Catholic, why did their children grow to be giants who devoured the earth? Biology doesn't work that way. You cannot get a 12-foot superhuman from a human-human union, no matter how sinful the parents are. But if you introduce a third strand of DNA, if you introduced a code that isn't from here, then the impossible becomes possible. This brings us to the most damning piece of evidence against the official story, the universal myth. If the Genesis 6 event was just a local story about Jewish lineage, it should have stayed local, but it didn't. Every single major ancient civilization has a record of this exact event. They changed the names, but the details remain terrifyingly consistent. Go to Sumer, the oldest civilization we know of. They have the text of the king list. It separates history into two eras, antediluvian, before the flood, and post-diluvian, after the flood. They describe a group of beings called the Apkallu, 7 sages, described as being part man, part fish, or part amphibian. They came from the Abzu, the abyss, or the deep water, and they taught humanity civilization. They taught us how to build cities, how to read the stars, and how to write laws. The Sumerians didn't claim to invent these things. They claimed they were given to them by these non-human visitors. Go to Greece. What are the Titans? The offspring of Uranus, the sky, and Gaia, the earth. A union between the sky god and the earth mother. And what were the Titans? Giants. Powerful, chaotic beings who ruled the earth before the Olympians. And just like the Nephilim, they were imprisoned in Tartarus, a place of deep darkness, because they were a threat to the order of the cosmos. It is the exact same story. Go to the Americas. The Native American tribes, the Paiute, the Hopi, the Choctaw, all have distinct oral traditions about a race of giants who existed before the white man arrived. The Choctaw tell of the Nahulo, a race of giants of wonderful stature. The Paiute speak of the Sitaka, red-haired giants who were cannibals and lived in the Nevada desert. These aren't fairy tales to them. They are war stories. They are histories of a struggle for survival against a species that looked human, but was something else entirely. The official story asks us to believe these are all coincidences. The official story asks us to believe that the human imagination just happens to invent the exact same specific scenario. Sky fathers, earth mothers, giant offspring, global flood, on every continent independently. The broken truth asks, what if they are different witnesses to the same crime scene? What if the Titans and the Apkallu and the Watchers are just different names for the same entities? Once you accept that possibility, the Bible stops looking like a collection of moral fables and starts looking like a military briefing. It starts to look like a record of an incursion. And this is where we have to talk about the book that they took away from you, because there is a document that explains all of this in explicit detail, a document that names the names of these angels, a document that explains exactly what they taught humanity and why the flood was necessary to stop it. It's called the Book of Enoch. For centuries, this book was lost to the West. It was rumored to exist, quoted by the early church fathers, and even quoted in the New Testament itself. Look at the book of Jude, verses 14 and 15. Jude quotes Enoch directly. That means the brother of Jesus regarded this book as authentic. But by the 4th century, the church hierarchy decided it was too dangerous. It was too detailed. It focused too much on the angels and not enough on the structure they wanted to build. So they pushed it into the shadows. But it didn't disappear. It was preserved in Ethiopia. And then, in the 1940s, among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, we found it again. Older copies, validating that this text was read and revered by the community that produced John the Baptist and Jesus. So, if we reject the official story, what are we left with? We are left with the Enochian view. And this is where the investigation gets dark. Because Enoch doesn't just say angels came down. He tells us how, he tells us where, and he tells us what they wanted. According to the text, 200 Watchers, a specific class of angelic being, descended onto the summit of Mount Hermon, on the border of modern-day Syria and Lebanon. This wasn't an accident, it was a conspiracy. The text says they swore an oath. They made a pact, a mutual curse, binding themselves together to commit this transgression. They knew it was a crime. They knew the penalty was eternal chains, but they did it anyway. Why? What was worth giving up heaven for? Their leader was named Semjaza, and he wasn't alone. The text lists their chiefs, Arachiel, Ramiel, and Tamiel. These are names of power, and when they came down, they didn't just take women. That was only part of the operation. The text says they taught men. It was a trade, a transaction. They gave humanity tech in exchange for access to the genome. Think about the explosion of human civilization. We went from stone tools to metallurgy almost overnight in the archaeological record. The mainstream historians call it the urban revolution, but they can't explain the speed of it. Enoch explains it. He says the Watcher named Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields, and also breastplates. He taught them the art of war. Before this, violence was personal, a rock, a stick. Azazel introduced industrialized killing. He taught us how to pull metal from the earth and turn it into death. He says Semjaza taught enchantments and root cuttings, pharmakia, sorcery, the manipulation of consciousness, and the manipulation of biology. He says Kokabel taught the constellations. Barakajal taught astrology. They taught humanity how to look up and read the code of the stars, not to worship the creator, but to predict future and seize power. The sudden explosion of human capability wasn't slow evolution. It was an injection of forbidden technology. We were given weapons we weren't mature enough to handle. We were given knowledge that we didn't earn. And in exchange, the Watchers took what they wanted: the women, the DNA, the bloodline. The result was the Nephilim. And we need to understand what these beings were. They were not just tall people. They were a hybrid species. They were not fully human, and they were not fully angel. They had no salvation because they were not part of Adam's race. They were a genetic abomination. The text says they consumed all the acquisitions of men, and when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. They began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. This is the nightmare scenario that the Sunday school version leaves out. The pre-flood world wasn't just people being mean to each other. It was the Jurassic Park scenario. It was a world overrun by apex predators that looked like us but were stronger, faster, and hungry. It was a world where the human race was being hunted to extinction by its own replacements. This is why the flood happened. Genesis 6 verse 9 says Noah was perfect in his generations. The Hebrew word there is tamim. It is the same word used for a sacrificial lamb. It means unblemished, physically pure. It doesn't mean Noah was a nice guy who paid his taxes. It means Noah was one of the last men left on earth whose DNA hadn't been corrupted by the Watcher incursion. The flood wasn't just a judgment. It was a quarantine operation. The human genome had been hacked. The virus was spreading, and the water was the only way to sterilize the lab. Noah was the backup drive. He was the last copy of the original file. But here is the terrifying part. The text says there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that. And also after that. How? If the flood destroyed everything, how did the giants return? How did we get the Anakim, the Amim, and the Rephaim that Joshua fought in the Promised Land? Did the Watchers come back? Or did something survive the water? This is where we move from ancient history to the evidence you can touch. Because if these beings existed, if they built cities and fought wars, they would have left bones. They would have left ruins. And the powers that be have spent the last 200 years trying to hide them. We are about to open the vault on the Smithsonian. We are about to look at the newspaper reports that you are never meant to see. If you value this level of research, if you want to know what they are hiding in the basement of Washington, D.C., tap follow on Spotify. It means this investigation reach more people who are waking up. We are going into the archives. This is where the theory becomes tangible history. Up until now, we have been talking about texts. We have been talking about Sumerian clay tablets and Hebrew scrolls. And the skeptics, the debunkees, they love that. Because texts are open to interpretation. They can say, oh, that's just a metaphor, or it's just poetry. But bones? Bones are not a metaphor. A femur that is 30 inches long is not poetry. It is biological fact. And this is where the investigation moves to a crime scene that is much closer to home. We are not going to the Middle East. We are going to the American Midwest. We are going to the Ohio Valley. We are going to the deserts of Nevada. Because the United States of America sits on top of the largest graveyards of this hybrid species in the world. Let me take you back to the 19th century. Manifest destiny is in full swing. Settlers are pushing west. They are cutting down forests. They are plowing prairies, and they are digging foundations for new towns. And everywhere they go, from West Virginia to Wisconsin, from Kentucky to Tennessee, they encounter the mountains. These weren't just piles of dirt. They were complex geometric earthworks. Circles, squares, octagons, some of them covering acres of land. Some of them aligned perfectly with the moon and the stars. And when the settlers dug into them, they didn't just find arrowheads. They found the builders. Now, I want you to read the reports. These aren't from conspiracy blogs. These aren't from the National Enquirer. These are from the reputable mainstream press of the day, the New York Times, the Scientific American, the Washington Post. County historical records. Back then, there was no centralized control over archaeology. If a farmer found a giant, the local newspaper reporter came out, measured it, took a picture, and printed the story. It was news. It wasn't forbidden. Yet. Let's look at the file. Exhibit A. The New York Times, May 4th, 1912. The headline reads, Strange Skeletons Found in Wisconsin. The article states, the discovery of several skeletons of human beings while plowing a mound at Lake Delavin indicates a race of men heretofore unknown. The heads, presumably those of men, are much larger than those of any race inhabited America today. From the bones of the nose to the cheekbones, the skull seems to approach the likeness of the monkey, but the height varies from 7 to 9 feet. Did you catch that? 7 to 9 feet. Now, a 7-foot man is rare, an NBA player, but a 9-foot man, that is beyond the scope of normal human variation. And notice the description of the skull: sloping forehead, likeness of the monkey. This isn't a normal Native American skull. This is something else. Exhibit B, the San Antonio Press, July 30th, 1930.
Sorry to interrupt your regularly scheduled podcast, but this episode is brought to you by the Broken Truth merch. Support the show. Wear the truth. Official Broken Truth podcast merch is live now. Links in the description. And since you've made it this far in the episode, comment hashtag Broken Truth and leave us a 5-star review on your favorite platform. Because when you speak up, the algorithm listens. And so does the world.
WPA workers unearthed a prehistorical burial ground in varying depths. The skeletons were described as being of enormous size. One of the skeletons measured 7 feet, 7 inches. Exhibit C, the Charleston Daily Mail, October 22nd, 1922. One of the most interesting features of the excavation was the finding of a skeleton of a man who in life must have been a giant. He measured 7 feet, 5 inches tall. I could do this for hours. There are literally thousands of these clippings. In town histories from Deerfield, Massachusetts to Kanawha Valley, West Virginia, and the details are strangely specific. They don't just say big men, they mention specific anomalies. The most common anomaly reported is the double row of teeth. In a dragline excavation in the Midwest, reports surfaced of skulls with full double set of dentition, an extra row of teeth behind the first. Now, in modern medicine, this is a rare condition called hyperdontia. It usually results in a messy, crowded mouth. But these skulls, they describe the teeth as perfect, aligned, a grinding machine designed for a different diet. Another common detail: 6 digits, 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot. This is called polydactyly. Now, pause. Where have we heard about 6 fingers and giants before? Go back to the Bible, 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 20. It describes a battle against a giant of Gath. And there was yet a battle in Gath, where was a man of great stature, that had on every hand 6 fingers, and on every foot 6 toes, 24 in number, and he also was born to the giant. The Bible links gigantism with 6 fingers. The American reports from the 1800s link gigantism with 6 fingers. Are we supposed to believe that 19th century farmers in Ohio were cross-referencing obscure verses in 2 Samuel before they reported their findings to the local press? Or were they just describing what they saw in the dirt? So the question is, where are the bones? If there were thousands of skeletons found, where are they? Why aren't they in the high school biology labs? Why aren't they on display in New York? Enter the Smithsonian Institution. Established in 1846, this institution was created to be the guardian of American history, but almost immediately, it became the gatekeeper. In 1879, a man named John Wesley Powell was appointed as the director of the Bureau of Ethnology at the Smithsonian. Powell was a strict evolutionist. He was a man of his time. He believed in the linear progression of human history: savages, then barbarians, then civilized men. He had a problem: the mounds. The sheer engineering genius of the American mounds, perfect circles, complex astronomy, didn't fit the narrative that the Native Americans were savages, and the giant bones found inside them, they definitely didn't fit the narrative of evolution. So Powell issued a doctrine. It is known as the Powell Doctrine. The official stance on the Smithsonian became this: no Native American tribes were to be credited with advanced metallurgy, writing, or engineering, and any anomalous finds, anything that didn't fit the standard timeline, were to be classified as hoaxes or misidentifications. We have whistleblower accounts, reports from people who worked within the system, that detail what happened next. When a report of a giant skeleton came in, the Smithsonian would send a team. They would arrive at the farm or the excavation site. They would secure the find. They would crate up the bones. They would tell the farmer, "Thank you for your service to science. These will be displayed in Washington." And then the bones would disappear. They were never displayed. They were never cataloged in the public record. There are letters. In the Smithsonian's own archives, you can find responses to inquiries where they admit to having these bones, only to later claim that they were lost or crumpled to dust due to poor preservation. But there is a darker rumor, a persistent allegation that in the early 20th century, a barge loaded with crates from the Smithsonian took a trip into the Atlantic Ocean and dumped thousands of anomalous artifacts into the deep water. Why? Because to admit the existence of the giants is to validate the Bible. To admit the existence of the giants is to admit that the history of humanity is not a clean, upward slope of evolution. but a messy, terrifying war between competing bloodlines. But they couldn't hide everything. Some places were too remote, some stories were too loud. Let's go to Lovelock, Nevada. In the desert, about 80 miles northeast of Reno, there's a cave. It's called Lovelock Cave. For generations, the Paiute Indians of that region told a story. They said that when their ancestors arrived in the land, they were at war with a race of giants called the Sitaka. The Paiute said the Sitaka were tall, had red hair, and were cannibals. They said these giants would snatch up the Paiute children and eat them. The war lasted for years. Finally, the Paiute tribes banded together. They cornered the last of the Sitaka in this cave. The giants refused to come out, so the Paiute piled brush at the mouth of the cave and set it on fire. They suffocated them. For years, while anthropologists laughed at these stories, just a myth, they said. Red-haired giants in Nevada? It's impossible. Then, in 1911, a pair of miners named David Pugh and James Hart went into the cave to mine for bat guano. They started digging. 4 feet down, they stopped finding bat poop and started finding artifacts. They found sandals, but not normal sandals. These sandals were 15 inches long. Try to find a 15-inch sandal at the mall today. That is a size 20-something shoe. They kept digging. They found skeletons. One of them was 6 feet 6 inches, tall, but human. But then they found others. Skeletons that measured 8 feet tall and wrapped around the skulls, mummified skin, and red hair. The Humboldt Museum in Winnemucca, Nevada, still has some of the artifacts. You can go there. You can see the sandals. You can see the skulls. But the big bones, the massive femurs that were photographed at the time, are gone. When the University of California, Berkeley sent in their archaeologists, the main skeletons were taken back to the university. And today, if you ask to see them, they will tell you they don't exist. They will tell you the red hair was just pigmentation change from the soil. But the Paiute know what they saw, and the miners know what they found. Let's move from the desert to the ocean, Catalina Island. In the 1920s, an amateur archaeologist named Ralph Glidden dug up the Channel Islands off the coast of California. He claimed to have found a race of giants, men 7 to 9 feet tall, buried in royal fashion. Glidden was a showman. He wasn't a careful scientist. He actually built a museum of the island Indians and decorated the walls with bones. It was a macabre, but thousands of people saw them. There are photographs of Glidden standing next to skeletons that dwarf him. The official story on Glidden today is that he was a fraud. They say he rearranged bones to make them look longer. But look at the photos, look at the sheer volume of the remains, and ask yourself, why would he fake a narrative that matched the Paiute legend and the Wisconsin mounds perfectly without having access to those reports? The pattern is global, the cover-up is global, and this leads us to the most disturbing question of all. If these beings were here, if they built the mounds, if they ate the people, if they ruled the earth, did they ever really leave? Or did they just go underground? We have reports from the military, modern reports. We aren't talking about 1890 anymore. We're talking about 2002. We're talking about the Kandahar province in Afghanistan. There's a story that has circulated in the special operations community for 20 years. It is known as the Kandahar Giant. The official military stance is we have no record of this event. But the men who were there, the pilots, the operators, they tell a different story. They tell a story of a patrol that went dark in a remote valley. A reaction force was sent in. They found the gear of the missing soldiers at the entrance to the cave. The ground was littered with broken radio equipment and bone fragments. And then, something came out of the cave. And the witnesses describe a humanoid, 12 to 15 feet tall, red hair, 6 digits on the hands and feet, wearing animal skins. And it moved with a speed that shouldn't be physically possible for something that size. It speared one of the operators, a man we called Dan, straight through the chest. The team opened fire. They were carrying M4 carbines, 50 caliber sniper rifles, and SAW machine guns. They lit up. They saw it took 30 seconds of sustained fire to drop the target. 30 seconds. When it was over, a helicopter was called in. A CH-47 Chinook. The body was loaded onto the cargo net. The pilot stated the cargo weighed 1,100 pounds. The soldiers were made to sign non-disclosure agreements. The report was classified. The body was flown to an undisclosed location. Some say Ohio. Some say a base in the Indian Ocean. Is this folklore? Is this just a campfire story for soldiers? Maybe. But it matches the description of the Nephilim perfectly. It matches the description of the Lovelock Giants perfectly. Red hair, double rows of teeth, massive stature, and violence. It suggests that the seed war didn't just end with the flood. It suggests that there are pockets of this DNA still hiding in the desolate places of the earth, waiting. And this brings us to the why. Why cover this up? Why go to such lengths dumping bones in the ocean, burning reports, silencing soldiers, just to hide a few big skeletons? Because if you acknowledge the giant, you acknowledge the watcher. If you acknowledge the watcher, you acknowledge that the human genome is an open system. You acknowledge that we are not just evolving apes, but a prize in a cosmic war. And if you acknowledge that, then you have to look at what is happening in our laboratories right now. You have to look at the CRISPR. You have to look at the transhumanist agenda. Because if the watchers did it once, they will do it again. Jesus said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." What are we seeing today? We are seeing the reintegration of the gods. We are seeing the return of the hybrid. In the next section, we're going to look at the modern application. We're going to look at how the ancient magic of the Watchers has become the science of the 21st century. We are going to look at the UFO connection. Because the craft that are appearing in our skies, they aren't coming to save us. They are the same entities that came to Mount Hermon. They just upgraded their chariots. Keep listening. We're entering the endgame. We have looked at the bones, we have looked at the newspapers, we have looked at the military reports, but there is one more place we need to look for evidence. And this place isn't buried in a mound in Ohio. It isn't hidden in a cave in Afghanistan. It is flowing through the veins of 15% of the human population right now. We need to talk about blood. Specifically, we need to talk about the Rh negative blood. Here's the science. Most people, 85% of the world, are Rh positive. That means their red blood cells carry a protein called rhesus factor. It is called rhesus because it was discovered first in rhesus monkeys. It links us to the primate family tree. It fits the evolutionary model. We share a common ancestor. We share the protein. Simple. But then there are the others, the Rh negatives. They do not have the monkey protein. Their blood is pure in a way that science cannot fully explain. If humanity evolved from a single primate ancestor, where did this variation come from? Why does a mother with Rh negative blood reject her own fetus if the baby is Rh positive? Her body treats the baby as a foreign invader. It creates antibodies to attack it. Think about it. In nature, a mother's body is designed to nurture life. But in this specific genetic pairing, the body fights the life it is creating. It acts like the two bloodlines are incompatible species. Why? The broken truth theory is this. Rh negative blood is not a mutation, it is a remnant. It is the genetic signature of a lineage that was not entirely of this earth. Look at where Rh negative blood is most common: the Basque region of Spain and France, the ancient Celtic lands, the exact same places where the legends of the Tuatha de Danann, the people of the goddess Danu, originate. These were described as a race of gods who arrived in ships from the sky, bringing magic and technology. The European royalty, the Blue Bloods, were obsessed with keeping their bloodlines pure. They intermarried for centuries. We are told it was for political power, but what if it was for genetic preservation? What if they knew, deep in their family archives, that they carried a specific code, a code that goes back to the Watchers? If you are Rh negative, I'm not saying you're an alien. I'm saying you might carry the biological echo of an ancient intervention. You are walking evidence that the human genome is not a closed loop. But let's move from biology to engineering. Because if these beings were real, if they had the technology to manipulate DNA, they certainly had the technology to move rocks. The official story tells us that the Great Pyramid, the temples of Peru, and the platform at Baalbek were built by primitive men with copper chisels, hemp ropes, and unlimited free time. They tell us it was all for ceremonial purposes. That is a lie. Let's go to Baalbek in Lebanon, the Temple of Jupiter. The base of this temple is built on top of an even older platform. And in that platform, there are 3 stones known as the trilithon. These stones weigh between 800 and 1,200 tons each. Let me put that into perspective. A Toyota Camry weighs nearly 2 tons. So each one of these stones is equal to 600 cars stacked on top of each other. We have almost no cranes in the world today that can lift a 1,200-ton block and place it with laser precision. And yet, we are told the Romans did it. The Romans built with brick and concrete. They didn't move mountains. There is no record in Roman engineering manuals of how to move a stone that size. If you look at the quarry nearby, there is an even bigger stone. The stone of the pregnant woman. It weighs 1,600 tons. It was cut, distressed, and then abandoned. Why? Because the builders left. The local legends don't say the Romans built it. The local legends say it was built by the jinn, the genies, under the command of King Solomon. Or, even further back, that it was built by the giants before the flood as a launch pad, the Baalbek, a place of the Lord of the Sky. This fits the Enochian narrative perfectly. Remember, the Watchers taught men eternal secrets. They taught engineering. They taught mathematics. These structures are not temples. They are infrastructure. They are the landing pads of the fortress of a civilization that was global, high-tech, and non-human. Go to Peru, Sacsayhuaman, massive polygonal stones, some weighing hundreds of tons, fitted together so perfectly that you cannot fit a piece of paper between them. They are not held together with mortar. They are held together by shape. They are interlocking like a 3D puzzle. We cannot replicate this today. If we try to build a wall like that, we use concrete. We don't carve granite into irregular shapes that fit perfectly in 3 dimensions. That requires a level of geopolymer knowledge or sound frequency technology that we have lost. Or rather, technology that was taken away. This brings us to the Great Deception. We have established the motive, genetic corruption. We have established the means, forbidden technology. We have established the evidence, the bones and the stones. So how does this connect to you, sitting in your car or your living room in the 21st century? It connects because the Watchers are rebranding. For thousands of years, they were called gods, Apollo, Marduk, Quetzalcoatl. Then, in the Christian era, they were called demons, incubus, succubus, the unclean spirits. But in the atomic age, they needed a new mask, a mask that fits our scientific worldview. So they became extraterrestrials. Look at the timeline, 1947. This is the key year. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd throws a rock into a cave in Qumran and discovers the Dead Sea Scrolls, bringing the Book of Enoch back to the world. In 1947, Kenneth Arnold sees a formation of flying saucers over Mount Rainier, coining the term. In 1947, something crashes in Roswell, New Mexico. In 1947, the CIA is founded. In 1947, the National Security Act is passed. It is not a coincidence, it is a convergence. The portal opened, the knowledge returned, and the cover-up began. The modern UFO phenomenon is not about travelers from Zeta Reticuli coming to explore our planet. It is the Watchers manifesting in a form that modern man will accept. Think about the abduction phenomenon. What is the number one thing abductees report? They are taken, they are paralyzed, and then reproductive experiments. Eggs are harvested, sperm is harvested, fetuses are implanted and then removed. It is always about the genetics. Why would an alien civilization that can travel faster than light need to steal eggs from a housewife in Nebraska? It makes no sense, unless they aren't aliens, unless they are the same entities from Genesis 6, continuing the same program they started on Mount Hermon. They are trying to build a body. They are trying to create a vessel that can house them in this dimension. Aleister Crowley, the famous occultist, performed a ritual in 1918 called the Alamantra Working. He claimed to open a portal and contact a being called Lamb. He drew a portrait of Lamb. Go look it up. Google Aleister Crowley Lamb. It is a gray alien, big head, small mouth, slanted eyes. Crowley drew this 30 years before the Roswell crash, 30 years before the gray became a pop culture icon. Crowley wasn't contacting a spaceman, he was contacting a fallen angel. The entity is the same, the mask changes, but the face underneath is the same. And this is why the government disclosure is happening now. Have you noticed? The Pentagon is releasing videos. The Navy pilots are going on 60 Minutes. Congress is holding hearings on UAPs. Why now? After 70 years of denial, why are they suddenly saying, yes, they're real? Because they're preparing the narrative. They are getting you ready for the arrival. They are going to tell you that our space brothers are here to help us. They're going to tell you that they seeded us here, which is a half-truth. They're going to offer us technology to solve our problems, clean energy, cures for cancer. But the price will be the same as it was in the days of Noah. The price will be your DNA. The price will be your humanity. They're not coming to visit. They are returning to rule. In the final part of our investigation, we're going to look at the endgame. We're going to look at the mark, the machine, and the spiritual war that is being fought in your mind right now. We're going to connect the Silicon Valley obsession with immortality to the ancient quest of the Nephilim. We are almost at the bottom of the rabbit hole. Don't turn back now. Why does this matter? Why spend hours digging up old bones and reading dusty scrolls? Why should you care about what happened on a mountain in Syria 5,000 years ago? Because Jesus said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." He didn't say it would be sort of like the days of Noah. He said it would be as it was. So we have to ask, what was the defining characteristic of the days of Noah? It wasn't just that people were violent. It wasn't just that they were greedy. It was genetic hybridization. It was the corruption of the human seed. It was a world where the line between man and monster had been erased. And look around you. Look at the headlines. We are walking right back into that nightmare. The broken truth is this. The war has never been nation against nation. It has never been capitalist against communist. It is and always has been a seed war, a war on the human genome. They tried to corrupt the bloodline once to stop the Messiah from coming. They are trying to corrupt the bloodline now to prevent the human race from remaining human. We are witnessing the rise of the modern watchers. They don't wear robes anymore. They wear lab coats. They wear Silicon Valley hoodies. Let's look at the 3 pillars of the new incursion. Pillar 1, the rewriting of life. We are now rewriting the code of life. With technology like CRISPR Cas9, scientists can go into a DNA strand, snip out a gene, and paste in a new one. They call it editing. I call it playing God. We are creating chimeras in labs. We are putting human brain cells into rats. We are mixing spider DNA with goats. The Defense Department is openly talking about super soldiers, soldiers who don't need sleep, soldiers who can see in the dark, soldiers who don't feel pain. What happens when you enhance a human to the point where they are no longer human? If you change the code that God wrote, do you lose the signature of the Creator? At what point does a man become a Nephilim? Pillar 2, transhumanism. The goal of the transhumanist movement is simple: to merge man with machine, to achieve immorality through technology. Elon Musk calls it Neuralink. He says we need it to compete with AI. He says we need to hook our brains up to the digital cloud. The World Economic Forum calls it the 4th Industrial Revolution. They talk about the Internet of Bodies. They want you to put the chip inside you. They want to connect your biology to the networks. This is the exact same premise the serpent gave in Eden. Ye shall be as gods. It is the exact same promise the Watchers gave on Mount Hermon. We will teach you the secrets of heaven. But the trade-off is always your soul. If you upload your mind to a server, are you still you? Or are you just a copy, a digital ghost trapped in a machine? Pillar 3, the alien savior narrative. This is the final card they play. The world is in chaos, economic collapse, war, pandemics, fear. People are desperate for a savior, and the government is slowly, carefully peeling back the curtain of the UFO reality. They are preparing you for contact. When they show up, when the ships appear over the cities, they won't look like monsters. They will look like angels of light. They will look like engineers of our future. They will say, "We seated you here. We are your creators, and we have come back to save you from yourselves." They will offer us technology to fix the climate. They will offer the medical tech to live forever, but they will ask for one thing in return. They will ask for your allegiance. They will ask you to accept their upgrade. This is the deception that the Book of Revelation warns about, the mark. It isn't just a barcode on your forehead. It is a declaration of ownership. It is a change of nature. If you take the mark, you are no longer of the seed of Adam. You belong to the beast. You belong to the Nephilim system. History is a circle. The giants are waking up. The ancient gods are knocking at the door. The question is, will you recognize them when they arrive? Or will you welcome them with open arms because they promise you safety? The floodwaters aren't coming this time. The fire is coming. And the ark isn't a boat made of wood. The ark is your refusal to compromise. The ark is holding on to your humanity. We have only scratched the surface. We didn't even get to the megaliths of the ocean floor or the genetic anomalies of the Paracus skulls. The world is stranger, darker, and more magical than they told you. The bones are there. The texts are there. You just have to be willing to look. If you made it this far, you're part of the resistance. You are the remnant. Hit the follow button on Spotify right now. Turn on the bell for notifications. They can shadow ban us. They can hide us from the search results, but they can't stop you from listening if you're subscribed. We need you in this fight. Share the episode. Send it to 3 people who are asleep. Wake them up. I'm your host, Garrett. This has been The Broken Truth. The seed war is on. Stay human.
In a world built on hidden histories and half-truths, we've only just begun to peel back the layers. Because what you've heard tonight was never meant to be known. But you we're meant to find it. If you're ready to go deeper, leave us a review, comment your thoughts, share this episode, and step inside the archives. Join the inner circle, where the real evidence is kept. This is the broken truth, because the truth isn't whole, it's broken.